We want to do some top 10 defenses here.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about the method behind the madness for creating the list. I had a hard time with this, and here's why. Even the defenses that you should theoretically feel good about, the ones that have been borderline elite or rated in pen top 10 defenses over the last couple years, there's a question about like every single one of them. The Cowboys have a new coordinator and less talent. The Niners have a new coordinator. The Steelers, I guess there's not as many questions about them, but there are personnel questions for them. Like there are guys in starting roles there where it's like, you feel good about that. The Patriots lost the best defensive coach of all time. Okay. The Chiefs lost a all-pro level corner, and there's a question about how they replace him. The Jets have chipped away at their depth in a way that I think is notable and we'll get to. And the Browns got shish kebabbed at the end of last year against really good offenses that they played. So there was always a question. So, and I kind of struggled with who to put up there at the top because I didn't necessarily feel, and the Ravens also, I don't think I mentioned this. The Ravens lost their defensive coordinator in multiple pieces. There's a question about everybody. So the top five was harder to put together than I thought it was going to be. And I think that trickled down to the rest of my list.
The biggest difference to me between the offenses and the defenses was offenses. I went into almost all of them thinking to myself, man, what is the best thing that can happen here? What is the coolest thing that they can do? What's their next step forward? When I was looking at the defenses, everything in my brain went, how can this go wrong? And just like trying to
that's how it is, right?
There.
Like it's just the nature of each side of the ball.
Yeah, and it made for such a different exercise. And then to your point, even a lot of the best defenses, like there were a handful I still was very confident I was going to put in here. It was just a matter of like ordering. But other than really like 3 or 4, maybe you were just looking at a lot of holes on a lot of these teams. And I think especially outside of the top 4 or 5, you probably could have gone a lot of different directions. And I think we did.
I sort of did. I have more chalk than I wanted to when I started this list, because even if you have questions about some of these teams, and we'll get to them near the bottom half of the top 10, it's like, am I really going to leave this team off? It was just a way to hedge. It was just a way to protect myself, even if I didn't necessarily feel great about it. So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the teams you didn't have on there for one reason or another. Let's do the same thing we did with offenses. Who is the team you most wanted to put in the top 10 that you just couldn't quite get there with, even if it's a couple of them?
We just kind of talked about them, the Steelers. I still think they're going to be a good unit. I have no doubt that they'll still be a top half of the league unit. And they were last year. They were like 8th in, I think, EPA per play, 8th in success rate. They were a solid unit. And I still think the front is going to be really good. I really like Keanu Benton. Obviously, TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith are really good. They went out and signed Patrick Queen. I like the front. I look at the secondary, they have 2 awesome players, right? They have Minkah Fitzpatrick, and I think Joey Porter Jr. is one good, but also just my kind of corner. I mean, just punch you in the mouth. He's like Travarius Ward, Carlton Davis, like we just talked about. He's just that style of corner, and I love that. They are playing an NPC at nickel, and that is a huge concern to me. I think their other safety slot is a little bit concerning, and I really don't love a lot of their depth up front. Like their starters are really good, but the depth is concerning to me. Like if DeMarvin Leal has to play snaps again, I think that's a big problem. And then even some of their guys on the edge, Nick Herbig is nice, but he's kind of small. So this to me was just, I think if you pull out one of the Jenga blocks, things could get a little bit tricky. But I still think they'll be good.
I totally get that. And I do think that if you lose one of the stars, especially if Watt misses significant time, the entire makeup of the defense changes. I still had them at 6th. They were a top 10 defense last year, missing Minkah for a huge chunk of the season. The linebackers it was an untenable situation by the end of the year. Even if you have concerns or reservations about Patrick Queen, he is an upgrade over what they were trotting out at those spots last year. Cam Hayward was a little bit banged up last year. And so I do think that it wasn't a perfect season for them in a lot of ways. And let's say, all right, we have big questions about the second corner spot. Patrick Peterson played like a majority of the snaps for this team last year at that spot. And maybe this is giving them too much of the benefit of the doubt, but part of me just thinks that they figured it out with huge questions in the secondary before. So now you have Dante Jackson in there now. Cam Sutton's going to be suspended for half the season. Maybe he can play nickel in the back half of the year. I trust them to figure it out in that area specifically. And even though they played a lot of dime last year, there's like a quarter of their snaps is the second highest rate in the league. And I don't know if they have the bodies for that. Like there are some structural things, but I just think the front has a chance to dominate games and they can do enough on the back end. And if that front stays healthy and Benton takes the step forward that we think he's going to, you combine that with Minka and enough in the back seven. It's just hard for me to put that many teams over them to keep them off of a list like this.
I don't think that's crazy. I think I started when I did my first version of the list. I think I put them at 7th. And then they were just, for whatever reason, the team I kind of talked myself out of. Like I went in basically thinking all of the things that you just thought. And then they were the one team that I just, something felt a little off. And I just kind of started talking myself out of it. And maybe I'll be truthful. Maybe that's just me overthinking it. And maybe that's me not giving enough credit to how good this front probably will be. But again, the back end gave me a little bit of spookiness.
I think that's totally fair. And I also think that there are some worrisome stats and just numbers and things to think about. This is the oldest defense in the league last year. They're old and they're relying on aging pieces to really be at the forefront of this. Like if Hayward missed half the season, Watt's getting a little bit up there. I think that that's something to think about. They were number 1 in the league in EPA per play in the red zone last season. They got 8 red zone turnovers. No one else in the league had more than 6. Like you're not going to be able to rely on that going into the next year. But there's always a competing force on the other side as I was trying to pull them down. They finished second to last in explosive play rate allowed last season. And they still were like a top 7, top 8 unit. And it's because Minka missed most of the season. You drop him back in there, that number goes down. Even if you're a little bit less lucky with some of the health stuff and some of the turnover stuff and some of the red zone stuff, I still think it could maybe come out in the wash. But your concerns here are not unfounded. Like I think DVOA has them like 20th on defense. And I don't know, man.
I saw that and I was startled.
They've been too good for too long
exactly.
for me to do something like that. So even if you think the age cliff might be coming for some of these guys, I don't know. I'm just not that worried. I think the front could still take over games. I'm going to keep relying on that. All right. Who else? Anybody else that you wanted to put on, you just couldn't do it?
I think the most like the weird one that I almost wanted to put on was the Dolphins. Like I know they have a lot of health problems on the edge, but I think otherwise that could actually come together and be kind of a scary unit. I like what they've done at linebacker. Actually, I still think David Long is like an incredible player, just a little missile man of a person. So I actually kind of like what they have on defense. It's just I think when you make the change at defensive coordinator, that could be a little bit of a tricky thing, but they were the one team I was looking at, and I was like, "Do I want to make the bet?" And I couldn't get myself all the way over there.
Yeah, I get that. The edge stuff concerns me. Like those are arguably 2 of their 3 or 4 most important players on that side of the ball, and we don't know when those guys are going to play. That's a huge thing, especially when you combine it with a first-year defensive coordinator and just figuring out who they want to be on that side of the ball. I got a couple. I kind of wanted to put the Bears on there. Like the way that they played on defense in the second half of last season, the secondary, I think, has a chance to really be maybe like the best secondary in the league by the time the year is over. You take a step forward with Kyler Gordon, take a step forward with Tyreek Stevenson. Brisker's a decent player. You have Kevin Byard is now there. The linebackers are solid. I really like that group. The problem for me is just that I can't get there with a pass rush. If you could guarantee to me right now that Gervon Dexter would be a difference maker this season, and all of the hype and him changing his body and everything we've talked about was actually real, then I would feel a little bit more comfortable doing this. But I just don't even think that their starting defensive line is that scary, let alone when you start to dig into the depth a little bit. So that was one that I was like, maybe. But when I actually started to think about it, I just couldn't justify it.
I did put the Bears in, and probably a little bit higher than I wanted to, truthfully, because they were kind of just
all right. So where did you have them?
I think 6th or no 7th.
This is horrifying to me. I don't even know if I want to go down this road.
No,
all right, let's talk about this.
The thing is, when I was kind of waffling on, because I'll tell you right now, 7 through like 10, I probably changed every single team there like 4 or 5 different times. And so at a certain point, I did have the Bears off my list. And it was for basically what you mentioned. The pass rush outside of Montez Sweat is not even that good. Even when they got Montez Sweat, from week 9 on or whatever, they were still like 24th in pressure rate. Like,
yeah, they were the bottom quarter of the league.
Yeah, and like they didn't add anybody else really to go help it to go fix that. And again, maybe you're going to get a little bit jump forward from some of these young guys, but they didn't really bring in any reinforcements.
No, and now you're ranking, Austin Booker, if you can get something out of him, you bring in Yannick Ngakoue. Like, I think that's Yannick Ngakoue is not saving this group. Like, if this is going to be an elite unit, it's going to be a step forward from your young, highly drafted interior players, and it's going to be the secondary just wrecking shit. And I do think the way that Eberflus plays in the back end and some of the disguise, like, it's a hard defense to play against, but it's really hard to be a difference-making unit and a dominant unit and a top 10 sort of unit over a long stretch of time if you aren't hurting people with your pass rush when you don't blitz. So I just think it's a lot more fragile than I want it to be as I think about their ceiling. But you're not worried about that, I guess.
I mean, I am. Again, that was the reason I kind of had them off the list in the first place. But then I just looked at it a little bit more. I think I actually really like the run defense. The moves at linebacker I criticized last offseason when they made them. That's a pretty damn good linebacker duo. Like Tremaine Edmonds, I think was playing some of the best ball that we've seen from him in a long time. TJ Edwards is kind of steady Eddie. Like he's just the moderately above average linebacker who does all the things that you need him to do. He's perfect. He's the baseline. If you have a guy better than him, he's probably a Pro Bowler. If you're worse than him, you might need to replace him. And then the
But
back
that's
end,
what
like
you
you
need at
mentioned,
linebacker. As long as you got two of those guys, that's what you need from that position group. And if you look at it, there aren't that many teams where you feel really good about who their two starting inside off-ball linebackers are. And the Bears probably have one of the best duos in the entire league, even if we're not talking about one guy being an all-pro player like a Roquan Smith happened to be for them.
100%. I mean, that's the thing. There's only what 3, 4 of those guys, and so if you can just get two of the other above average guys, you're in a good spot. So I do like that there, especially in this defense, where they're going to ask those guys to cover a lot. They're not doing a lot of blitzing, so these guys kind of have to sit in coverage and do their job. And then, like you mentioned, the secondary, man, I'm kind of bought in on it. I actually think I'm a little bit worried about losing Eddie Jackson and going to Kevin Byard. I'm not really sure if he has a ton left in the tank, but the corners are just so sick. And I actually think they have decent depth there, like Terrell Smith, who I think was a rookie last year or the year before.
He was a rookie
You
last
don't
year. I love that you're trotting out the Terrell Smith propaganda right now.
you don't want him to play necessarily. Like you don't want any backup to play, but I think if he has to get thrown in there for 3, 4 weeks at a given time, like it's probably a better situation than most teams are going to have in terms of their
He did, and he
cornerback
had to
depth.
play
So
last year.
yeah, and
He
he
had to
was
play
not
last
bad.
year for this team, and I think he was more than playable. So again,
Mhm.
the upfront concerns that's what just I keep coming back to those. But I think it's easy to get really excited about what they are on the back end. I probably would have put them at 11 if we were digging a little bit further down. A couple other teams, the Bills. The Bills have been so good on defense for
Yeah.
so long, but and Milano's back practicing, which I don't think I realized before I got there. And we're going to see him early in the season. At what capacity, I think, is a question, but I can't get there with the second safety spot right now. The fact that we already have injuries there and they're down two of those guys. They're down the rookie whose name I can't remember right now and Mike Edwards. And so now we've got Taylor Rapp like clearly is your best safety. Like that's the one thing gives me a lot of pause about what that group looks like. I think a Micah Hyde reunion is not off the table, but I would be surprised if they did anything splashier than that. Like this is not a Justin Simmons team, and so I worry about their ability to kind of piece that group together. The Raiders, too many questions about the secondary. Like the second corner spot and they were so healthy last year and they have no depth. That's my thing about them. If they get a couple injuries, I think they're going to be in a really bad way, even if I like Patrick Graham and some of the stuff he does. The Vikings still have too many holes, especially at corner. Obviously, the Kyrie Jackson thing is tragic, but it just leaves them with more concerns and questions at those spots than I think. And with Seattle, I think they can do it. Like if you told me that Seattle had the 8th best defense in the league this year with Mike McDonald, it would not surprise me whatsoever. But I don't want to put too much on that. There's still enough questions about the second level, what the secondary is going to look like, all of that for me to get all the way there. But I actually do think I'm more optimistic about that group than some other people might be heading into the season.
I think I'm with you on most of those. With the Bills, my hang up was so last year they played admirably well for how many injuries they had, right? Like it was kind of incredible what they were able to do. The thing is, all of those guys that came in off the bench to start at the end of last year are now just the starters. So if that's your starting point, if you lose any more of the dominoes now what? Like you're just in an even worse position. So that was kind of my hang up. Like they could probably still be an above average unit. Like McDermott's done such a good job there for such a long time. It's just a little bit more fragile than I was wanting.
Yeah, especially at safety. And at corner, I actually think that Elam has apparently looked pretty good. And the fact that now he's depth, if you lost one of your outside guys, you could drop him in. And I think things have slowed a little bit down for him. The defensive line just doesn't have that many like true difference makers on it. Ed Oliver's a really good player, but other than that, you mostly got B's and B minuses. So I do think they'll be solid. I think, again, I put them at 12 probably. I think they'll be a good defense, but they just couldn't crack this list because of some of the personnel concerns. All right, let's start listing this off here. I'm going to let you start. Who is at number 10 for you on your top 10 defenses list?
Yeah, I'm gonna start with a team that really didn't even sniff my list the first time I made it, and then just the more I thought about it, this is absolutely a coach and a team I want to buy in on. That was the Detroit Lions. I think I felt like I needed to make one swing in this top 10 because it was so kind of random, and the Lions were one that I just wanted to bet on. They just, first of all, they just play the way that I like a team to play. Like Aaron Glenn is very much a coach. We talked about it with the Carlton Davis thing on the last show. Aaron Glenn wants to be physical. He wants to be physical on the outside with his corners. He wants to make you earn every blade of grass that you're running on routes. I think that's a huge thing, and I think now they have the personnel for it. You get a guy like Carlton Davis, you get a guy like Terry and Arnold. Brian Branch is already there. You draft Ennis Rakestraw for depth because so the last couple of years, really since Glenn has got there, they have struggled to field starting corners, let alone depth. Now they very obviously have guys who should be able to play off the bench if they need them. I think that that's just a huge, huge upgrade for what it's going to do for them in the secondary. And then the front, Aiden Hutchinson is the obvious star. Alim McNeil is pretty good. But otherwise, I think they're actually in a pretty decent spot, even if there's not that many other heavy hitters. And I actually, even at linebacker, there are some questions about what the ceiling is for that position, but I kind of like the depth and rotation they have. I mean, Alex Anzalone and Jack Campbell are probably going to be your starters, but Derek Barnes is a pretty good run defender if you need him to be. Malcolm Rodriguez, same thing. And I think he's actually a really good tackler. So they have decent depth there. So I'm not that concerned. I kind of just love the depth that they have in the back seven. And I think so long as Aiden Hutchinson stays healthy, your pass rush in front will probably be pretty good. So this just all the personnel upgrades with me being a longtime Aaron Glenn guy. This felt like the unit I wanted to make a stand on.
I have no problem with this whatsoever. They were the one team on my just off honorable mention list that I didn't actually say out loud. So in all of those teams, I think you could make a justifiable case to put them at 10. My biggest concern is still the other edge players. With Kaminsky getting hurt, I think you start to chip away at the flexibility and the bodies that you can throw at the problem out there. It's easy to talk yourself into Marcus Davenport in August. I would like to see Marcus Davenport play like more than 6 games before I get overly excited about what he's going to be for an entire season. We talked about DJ Reader earlier this week, though. I do think that he's the rug that kind of can tie the room together in the front seven a little bit. You keep the linebackers cleaner. I think that he makes everybody around him better when he eventually gets back from the PUP list. And I'm with you on the back end depth. Like, they have so many guys they can throw at this. Like, Melifonwu was really good for them in the back half of last season, and he may not even start if they're going to end up playing Branch at safety more. So these are very, very good problems to have. And the Derek Barnes point is well taken. We talked about this all the time with the Chiefs and their ability to use those 3 linebackers in different ways. Barnes can play on the edge for you a little bit if you want to be in like 5 down fronts. And I do think the flexibility there is something that they leaned into. I would not be surprised at all if they ended up cracking the top 10 when it's all said and done. I guess I just have more questions about the front that were holding me back a little bit compared to how you're seeing them.
I think that's totally fair though. Like I really is. It really is. Like they don't really have another second pass rusher. And then even the linebackers, they don't necessarily have some of the coverage flexibility that Glenn was used to when he was in New Orleans. So I think maybe that could be a sticking point.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Alex Anzalone isn't prime Demario Davis.
I'm thinking not. I'm thinking that's not going to be the case. So maybe those are the 2 sticking points. But again, the way they play, I think Glenn is such a good coach that I was willing to make the bet here.
All right. This is the team that I have at 10, and I am not excited about this whatsoever. And I feel like I'm just a coward putting them here because I didn't know what else to do. I have the Dallas Cowboys at 10. I don't know how
higher, and I didn't like it.
I don't know how to handle this because you have a defense that the floor fell out of the defense. And I'm not just talking about the Green Bay game. The second half of last season, after Thanksgiving, this team was 29th in defensive success rate. 22.5% of their opponent plays went for 10 plus yards after Thanksgiving. It was the 3rd highest rate in the entire league. They were getting absolutely gashed. And I think you could make an argument that they're going to be put in better positions potentially schematically because of what Mike Zimmer can give them. You're going from a world where you played all this single high, all this man to, I'm assuming, more quarters. Like Zimmer was near the bottom of the league in man coverage rates his final couple years in Minnesota. This is a big transition that they're probably going to undergo. And if that can make you a little bit more stable, then can the talent lift you to keep you among the best defenses in the league? I don't know the answer to that. And that's kind of where I don't know what to do with them, because I think they still have really good players, but as they get used to playing a certain way, do they lose what actually made them such a dominant group because of the way that they played with Dan Quinn? I don't know where I land on that, and that's why I just threw them here without a better answer.
They were one of the most annoying defenses for me to look at and where to place. I ended up with them higher. I think I ended up with them like 6th or something like that. Like where I ended up being okay with it was I kind of just trust that Zimmer will get these guys in line, because truthfully, they played bullshit defense last year. Like this was
Yes.
they played the lightest boxes, and I don't necessarily mean like the numbers in the box. I mean
They
literally the
actually played
weight.
extremely heavy boxes with the amount of people in there, but the dudes
Right.
weighed 205 pounds.
The weight class of the players. Exactly. Like you have 270-pound defensive tackles. Your ends outside of DeMarcus Lawrence are really not that big. Like Parsons is strong, but he's not that big of a guy. And then all their linebackers were just like fake. Like Damon Clark is built like a normal linebacker, but almost everybody else that they were putting in the box, while they was rolling Donovan Wilson down, playing Marquise Bell, like these were just not guys that could take on blocks. And that was kind of the biggest issue to me. There was just nobody up front who could command space. And I'm still not all the way sure that they have those guys now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, has that improved at all? Like, does Eric Kendricks at this point in his career make you feel better about that?
I do feel a little bit better about having real linebacker bodies at linebacker. I do think that does something for the run defense. And I also think having Zimmer come in and establish a more sound way to play defense and a sound way to play their run fits does go a long way. Because you watch some of their run fits last year, even just aside from getting bullied because they were 15 pounds lighter than everybody else, they're just kind of shooting gaps, and like there's no real commanding space that you see from some of the greater defenses like Baltimore or teams like that, where they just very obviously understand what they're supposed to do to let the entire run fit trickle into place and make the puzzle work. That just in Dallas, bro, it was just unleash everybody and see what happens and pray to God that we can get into the backfield. And Zimmer's not really that way. And I think some of the, hey, let's play real football, let's be adults about this, I actually think that goes a long way and does a little bit more for me to keep them in that like top 8 range than it does for some of the talent they lost. I will say the one concern I have, they lost a lot of their reinforcements off the edge. Like obviously Micah's still there.
Off
Obviously
the edge
DeMarcus
and
Lawrence
other
is still there.
places.
Yeah.
You lose. Sam Williams gets hurt, right? So you
Yep.
lose Sam Williams on like the second, third day of camp. I was there that day. It was a huge bummer. You lose Dante Fowler and Dorrance Armstrong in free agency. So now you have to rely on Marshawn Kneeland, who's a second-round pick for you. And even if you're excited about Marshawn Kneeland, that's a huge lift for somebody we've never seen play. When they drafted Sam Williams in the second round, he could be like their 6th edge rusher. They are no longer in that position. And I think the same thing goes with the secondary. Last year when they lose Trayvon Diggs, they can just pop Deron Bland in there. It's like, all right, we're good to go. And the guy played at a really high level, even if he was buoyed by some of the interception numbers. Now, no such luxuries, man. Like if one of those guys goes down, you're dipping way deeper into the quality of player that you're able to put in those spots. So again, for me, it's like some of the concerns they had personnel-wise last year, you're worse on defense in terms of the players that you're trotting out. And so can a more sound approach here make up some of that difference? And maybe, but I also think that there's an acclimation period that I would just worry a little bit about. We're going to talk about another team that is going from a more conservative, we're going to eat up blocks sort of approach to a more attacking one. I think that's an easier transition and provides more immediate benefits than going the other direction in the way that the Cowboys are this offseason.
I think that is fair. Like I said, outside of I think my top 5, I didn't really feel comfortable where I placed a lot of these teams. It's just, I don't know. Zimmer's been too good at this for too long that I think I'm kind of willing to bet on him. And the thing is, this to me feels it's completely opposite in terms of the style. But when the Browns went from Joe Woods to Jim Schwartz, who just
Oh, we're gonna talk
very
about this with another team
yeah,
here.
where we very obviously have a clear identity about how we want to play the game now, and it's a much different identity than they had before. I think we're going to get something similar like that with Dallas. Obviously, they didn't add any talent to like supercharge them the way that the Browns got supercharged, but just in terms of like, okay, this stylistic change was very good for this unit. I think we're going to get something similar to that.
Who do you have at 9?
Who do I have at 9? Okay, this was another team that I actually had a lot of trouble ranking, and I assumed I would have them a lot higher coming in, and that's the San Francisco 49ers.
I
They're a
also have the
team.
San Francisco 49ers at 9.
Really? Okay, this makes
Yes.
me feel so much better. So when you started the list, did you think you were going to have them closer to like 5th, something like that, before you really got into
Yes.
it? Yes.
I think so. I think I was probably going to have them a little bit higher, even with some of the concerns I had coming in. What ultimately dragged them down for you?
So I'll start by saying when you have Fred, Nick Bosa, and Trevor Ward, you are probably going to be a top 10 or at least top 12 unit regardless. The thing is, like every other player gives me a lot of concerns. 2 of your other best players, Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw, are on the pup. I know how Hufanga is coming back very soon and Greenlaw will be back at some point, but when they haven't had a full healthy offseason, that's a tricky spot to be in, especially when those guys are
Greenlaw
really
tore his
enforcers.
Achilles 6 months ago.
He just shouldn't be. He's probably not going to be the same player that he was, at least not this year. Maybe 2025, totally different discussion. But it's just hard to assume that when he comes back, that he will be the same caliber of player. And they don't have the same depth that they've had in years past at that position. Obviously, they didn't last year either. But in years prior, they had Azeez Al-Shire that they could tap on, and they don't have a guy like that anymore. And then in terms of depth, you look it up front. They don't have guys off the edge they used to. 2 years ago, we were like, this is one of the deepest groups in the league. They've always got these waves of guys. They lost number 3 through number 7 on their pressures list from last year. 3 through 7, and they
Oh my
didn't
God,
really
I
add
didn't
a
even
whole
realize
lot.
that. I was going to talk
Yeah,
about Armstead, but I didn't even realize it went down that far.
it was basically everybody except for obviously like Nick Bosa, but like almost everybody after that is basically gone, and they're having to replace them. But they didn't really add anything significant that would be like, oh, this is a great replacement for it.
Yeah, I'm not excited about the replacements. Like
No.
going out and getting Leonard Floyd and Yetur Gross-Matos to be your second and third edge rushers because Drake Jackson's been banged up and also didn't come along the way that you wanted to. That worries me. Armstead was hurt for a good chunk of last season, but he still gave you 500 snaps, and they were good snaps. He had 42 pressures on 360 pass rush snaps. That's really good production. I just don't know if you're replicating that with Malik Collins and Jordan Elliott and some of the other guys that you brought in here, combined with this stuff on the edge. And do we want to talk about the third corner spot here? Like it's
Yes,
Isaac Yiadom.
I would love to.
Like Isaac Yiadom is currently winning this job. Because initially, I think the thought was they drafted Renardo Green in the second round. Would he be the other outside corner? That would be a concern for me. But now it's Yiadom, who he's been a journeyman. He had a decent season, back half of the season in New Orleans. Then he came over last year. I mean, they're just doing everything they can to not have Ambry Thomas be that second outside corner when Lenore moves inside. But that doesn't mean that I have to be thrilled with the solution here.
Exactly. Like I love Charvarius Ward. Almost every other corner spot here is like, and Lenore is a decent player, but he's not. I don't think a true difference maker. He's kind of just you're fine having him out there. But yeah, the third corner spot is just it's a nightmare to me. And this has been a problem for them for kind of a long time. Their best was probably when they had Emmanuel Mosley, but then like he got hurt. I think the last year he was there, and he's been hurt ever since. So they really have just kind of struggled finding that other spot. And then to go back to the front really quickly, where's the beef? Like they don't have guys who command space at all. Like Hargrave
And I think that's notable because they got run on last year. Like, how are they
yes.
not going to get run on this year? And maybe you going back to Nick Sorensen, their new defensive coordinator, who comes from this world, and I think is going to play in a way that Kyle wants him to. Where at times that wasn't the case with Steve Wilkes. Maybe that helps you out, but I think it's well taken. Like their run defense concerns, I don't think they did a lot to assuage those in my mind.
Yeah, like their D tackles are Javon Hargrave and Malik Collins, and those are great for getting in the backfield. For making sure you don't get run over on double teams, it's a completely different discussion. And for as good as Fred Warner is, and for as good as he is at sifting through trash, he's not the biggest guy, and he's good at taking on blocks for his size, but he's not one of these like Juwan Bentley just punch you in the face and he can take back space. It's just not really what he does. So it's kind of beneficial if you can have a little bit of space creation for him up front with the D tackles. But they just, especially when you lose a guy like Eric Armstead, they just don't really have that anymore. And so I'm a little bit worried that this could be a unit that gets run on a lot.
Yeah, and they're going to have to be dominant rushing the passer, I think, to hit the ceiling that people want them to. And they were unlucky last year in terms of converting pressures to sacks. They were down near the bottom of the league. Like, they still got after the quarterback, but didn't bring him down as much as you want, or as much as they had in years past. That could potentially be better, but maybe not, because the players that you're asking to do that aren't the same caliber of player as they've been in years past. So I'm giving them some deference here by putting them in the top 10, just because I do think that the star power can carry you. But I think we have a lot of the same concerns about what the ceiling potentially looks like. All right, who'd you have at 8 then?
8. So this was, this will probably feel bad for 49ers fans after having just put the 49ers at 9, but this to me is the Houston Texans. This was another
I
team
also
where
have the Houston Texans at 8.
Jesus. I feel like we actually had a lot more variety in our list here, except for these apparently two
It's coming. It's coming. It's coming.
Exactly. But no, the Houston Texans, man, they're just, it kind of goes back to what I said about the Lions a little bit, where this is just a coach that I'm very much willing to buy. Like D'Amico, his energy is incredible. I think the way that he has coached his players to just be in the right place in the right time, at 2 different spots now, has been incredible. I mean, even just last year, what he got out of Christian Harris, who before D'Amico Ryans arrived, it seemed like Harris was just a DOA type of draft pick. Like, he just did not know what was going on. Head was spinning. D'Amico gets there, and he is a functional linebacker. Like, very quickly, it helps that D'Amico is a linebacker himself. But I think you just see that type of just help along the defense from a guy like D'Amico. He's just a guy who kind of gets everybody where they want to be. And then you look at some of the additions they made. I think going and getting Danielle Hunter could absolutely supercharge this pass rush. Obviously, John Gennard was a great player. He's a little bit more of like a effort, power, that type of thing. Hunter is just absolute pure speed off the edge, man. And I think when you combine that with a guy like Will Anderson, who has some of that speed as well, but is a little bit more kind of finesse, a little bit more hand usage, a little bit more being able to move around as a piece, where like you don't necessarily want Hunter looping in and hitting a guard, but Will Anderson will go do that. The fact that I think you have this perfect pairing off the edge now is great. Obviously, they went and upgraded the linebacker room. We spent a lot of air talking about Azeez Al-Shire on the last show. And then the secondary, there's questions, right? And I think we'll talk about that, especially, if they're going to end up starting Kamari Lassiter. But I'm just willing to bet on. Yeah, I'm just willing to bet on it. I think with some of the way that D'Amico has talked about him, I'm okay with it.
Kamari Lassiter is going to be the other outside corner for the Texans. And talking to people there this week, the main question is speed, right? I mean, that was the question after the combine and the way he tested. And apparently he's not getting run by. Even by Tank Dell, Nico, some of those guys out there, he's not getting run by in camp. So if that's not happening, then where are our concerns? He already plays the way that they want him to play. And an angry guy is how he was described to me this week. And I think that fits the style that we're talking about with this team. So they feel really good about that. And we'll see. He's a rookie, and we'll see if some of those speed concerns do crop up. But I expect him to win that job. And the thing that I thought was really notable, when you're playing this style of defense, you need the front to play a certain way. And they already play that way. They were number 1 in the league in yards before contact per rush last season with that group that they were trotting out there. This run defense was incredible, even with some concerns about the linebacker depth and even with, some moving pieces up front. And now I think you could argue that they have better talent at both of those spots. We'll see what Dietrich is missing 6 games. And when you can drop him back in there, I feel very good about what that group is ultimately going to look like. You mentioned Danielle Hunter. I think the secondary is where my questions come in. This is Petrie going to be a full-time safety? Are you going to move him around a little bit? Who's going to end up in the nickel? That's the one question that I have. But I don't think it can be a lot worse than it was last year. They were 6th in explosive play rate allowed last season on the back end. And I think that's partially because you have Petrie in year 1 in a new system. And I think that they're, to me, the best version of this group potentially is Ward and Kalen Bullock, their 3rd round pick on the back end, and you move Petrie down into more of like a nickel-ish role where he can just be a demon. And I do think that group with the front 7, I can get on board with that. I can get really excited about that. Even if he has some deficiencies against, number 3 inside receivers in that exact role, I do think that the personality of the defense is best expressed with those 11 on the field in that way. And I just think that they're going to get there with the back end, even if it takes some trial and error.
The Petrie idea is so good because he is best when he is moving forward and at the line of scrimmage. So if you just put him a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage and let him go blow stuff up, you kind of solve the problem of him taking bad angles in the back end or his eyes being wrong. It kind of solves a little bit of that problem. So I love that idea.
And Bullock has real range, and that's really his selling point back there. So, and this group was borderline top 10 last year, even in a rebuilding unit with some big questions. So I have a lot of faith in where they can take it this year with year 2 and D'Amico and this staff and all of that. All right, who'd you have at 7?
At 7 was where I had the Bears, who we already kind of talked about a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. My number 7 is my spicy one here.
Okay.
I have the Green Bay Packers at 7.
Ooh. I did not expect to get a Green Bay Packers call on this show. Let's hear it.
I don't think a lot of people would, considering they were like the 25th ranked defense in the league last year. How many people would have said that the Cleveland Browns would have been a top 10 defense heading into last season, let alone the best defense in the league?
Hardly anybody. I didn't think they'd be an above average unit, let alone, like you said, best in the league.
And what you said before about going from a system where you were scrambling for an identity, there was so much passivity in the way that you played, you're just unable to unleash all of the talent that they had. I thought about the Packers and the Browns 2 years ago in a really similar way, where it's like you have so many guys that you feel good about. You've spent so many resources on this side of the ball, and you just can't get the best out of them. And I think switching over to a more one-gapping, attacking sort of approach, the same way the Browns did last offseason, I think that this team could take a huge jump if you tap into that sort of system, because they have the guys up front. That they finished 6th in pressure rate last year. Like, this is not, you don't have to tell yourself a story about what sort of personnel this team has. And they've got depth. They've got guys like Carl Brooks. Wooden played well last year. Lucas Van Ness stepping into year 2. Devontae Wyatt was so much better last season. I mean, there's a chance that Van Ness, even as a top 11 pick, is still your 3rd edge rusher this year because of what Preston Smith and Gary give you. And again, talking about the Texans and the way that they play, it starts with the front. And if your front can dominate games in this system, you can do a lot with that. And I think that this Packers team has a chance to do that. I really do. And we can talk about some of the other questions, but that is where this thing is rooted. If you let those guys play with a certain mentality and a certain style, they can take over games for you. And I think that this group has a chance to do that with the switch in mindset this year.
You're kind of selling me. I don't know. I don't know if it would be enough to put them in my top 10, but I think that's certainly higher than I would have thought of them before this segment. The front, you absolutely have me sold, because the thing is, if they were 6th in pressure rate last year, they can still be better. One, because of the system that you're saying, like if you just unleash these guys to go crazy, it could totally make sense, especially with just the way a lot of them want to play anyway, especially guys like Devonta Wyatt. But a lot of them are young. Like, there is a good chance a lot of these guys just get better. And even if they all just get 5% better, okay, well, that kicks them from 6th in pressure rate to 3rd or something like that. And that, may seem small, but that's when you get into the top 3, you are just hitting quarterbacks all the time. And that's absolutely huge. My concerns, I guess, were more in, I still think the linebacker play is questionable. I do think this type of system will be better for Quay. Like, I think if you can simplify things a little bit for Quay Walker, that could be huge. I think even if that's true, though, the second linebacker spot is still a huge question. I know they went and drafted Edrin Cooper, but he's like not a linebacker to me. So that was kind of a weird spot.
The youth down the spine is what could potentially hold this back, because you're relying on a young player in Quay Walker, a young nickel in terms of experience in Keyshawn Nixon, which that's, we'll see how that experiment goes. Javon Bullard as your second safety, Edrin Cooper is your second linebacker. I think that's all totally fair. And that is what could potentially hold this group back. But I feel good about the outside corners, because even if Eric Stokes does get hurt again, and it sounds like he's healthy, I mean, by all accounts, he's practicing, he's playing. He is that other guy on the other side of Jair Alexander. I thought that Carrington Valentine played well for them last year. And I actually think in this system, it really aligns with his strengths. He can be a little bit more aggressive. He can get up and just like be punching people in the mouth. And if Jair can stay healthy, I think the corners have a chance to be a strength of this team. And if you combine that with the front, I'm okay living with some of the youth in the middle of it. I do think that you can overcome it if you can play man with your corners and you can just beat the shit out of people with the front. So I'm banking huge on the stylistic change and the mindset change carrying this team in a similar way that the Browns got carried last year. And I'm not asking them to be the best defense in the league. All I'm asking is them to be the 7th best defense in the league. There's going to be somebody that sneaks up on us here. Somebody. And they're my bet just because I'm going to bet on the front first and everything else later.
No, it's a good point. I do think if we did the exercise of like who's a defense who was bottom 3rd last year that could be in the top 10, this would be a great pick. I don't know if I would have guessed that we actually got here, but I think it's a good pick. There are too.
The Lions
many
are
very,
also
very
really good pick, and I think that you can make a better, but get better case about fewer holes on the Lions. But again, I just feel better about the front in Green Bay, and we've seen this before. Maybe I'm putting too much stock in what happened in Cleveland last year, but I do think that there's something to that. If you can take guys who've had to eat up blocks and play a gap and a half, and you can just unleash them, the personality of that unit can change. And I really do think that the Packers have a chance to do that this year. They don't have somebody on the staff that has coached this front before. And I guess that would be partly maybe my biggest question because of how important the front is. The Browns, they had Schwartz, right? Like this started with Jim Schwartz in Tennessee, like 15 years ago, right? I mean, it's his baby in a way. And Chris Kasurik and the Texans defensive coordinator, Matt Burke, was in Tennessee with them. Aaron White-Cotton, who does this with the Jets, he was the assistant offensive line or defensive line coach for the Niners. So there's mostly people who have been very close to these ideas. Hafley was really the only one in Green Bay if you actually look at the staff, but that's really the only thing that was holding me back a little bit because I do think the personnel is set up to thrive if you let them play this way. All right, so I had the Steelers at 6. You had... Didn't you? We already talked about your number 6 team, didn't we? Who was it?
The Cowboys.
Cowboys. All right, so let's run through your 10 through 6 very quickly here before we get to the top 5.
Yeah, so my 10 through 6 was the Detroit Lions, San Francisco 49ers, Houston Texans, Chicago Bears, and the Dallas Cowboys.
All right, so I had the Cowboys at 10, the Niners at 9, the Texans at 8, the Packers at 7. God, there's a chance that looks really fucking dumb here, like 3 or 4 months from now. And I had the Steelers at 6.
All right, who's your? I love having one pick though, where it just might blow up in your face. I think it's
whatever. I had the Texans as the top 10 defense last year. I had the Texans as the top 10 defense last year, and people were like, "That's insane. How can you leave the Broncos off?" Defense is weird. It is important to acknowledge that defense is weird. All right, who'd you have at 5? I feel like our top 5 teams are probably going to have more overlap here.
In terms of, I'm more questioning, the construction, the order here, but I think the teams are basically the same. I actually had the New York Jets, who I went in thinking I was going to have higher on the list. And then I watched them a little bit more. I thought about some of the ways that this team is supposed to play and some of the personnel losses they had. And I think they'll be very good, but I got to a point where I couldn't get all the way back into elite territory with them.
I have them at 2. But I don't disagree with anything that you just said. Where do you think some of the weaknesses or the holes are that other people might not, that are super bullish on this team?
So for me, it was 2 things. One of them is personnel based, and the other one is like a stylistic thing, which might be more about me than about the Jets, truthfully. The personnel one is just they lost guys up front. And that's kind of objectively true. Obviously, they're trying to get
it's a huge
Hassan
deal.
Reddick. They're trying to get Hassan Reddick to come and play football, and I think that would help a lot. But the problem is you lose a guy like John Franklin Myers. I said this earlier for another team. I think it was the Niners. Where is the beef? Like, they don't have, I think having a guy like John Franklin Myers on the edge who could just crush the pocket on first and second down constantly and kind of free up some of these guys like Quinnen Williams, who's more of a quickness and explosive guy. And then some of their other quicker, faster edge rushers. I think having a guy like John Franklin Myers kind of went a long way. And so you don't have him now. You just lose a lot of beef on the edge. And I think that hurts your run defense as well. And then if you're, kind of structurally just in worse, if you're getting run on a little bit more, okay, maybe you're not in as many obvious pass situations. Okay, well, now your secondary is not quite as valuable as maybe as it was before. So that's a little bit my concern. My other thing was, and this is kind of similar to where's the beef, is I just don't think that this is a unit that plays with a lot of energy and a lot of physicality, especially in the back end. I think you look at a lot of the best defenses, or at least maybe it's just the ones that I like watching, but they are ones that will hit you. It's Baltimore, it's Kansas City, it's New England. Even, kind of the only other exception is the Browns, who play obviously a very similar style to the Jets. But I think if like it's just I just don't really like watching these teams that are not as physical. And I think the Jets don't really tick that box for me. And so I think that was probably the biggest thing that got me to drop them a little bit from this obviously elite tier, but putting them at kind of the end of the elite tier.
You've kind of talked me into this. I kind of wish I had them a little bit lower on my list. But again, everybody has questions, right? Like,
sure.
So everybody I have ahead or slightly behind them, I think has a ton of questions. And for me, it was about the continuity more than anything else. Like the fact that you have the same defensive staff, they've shown a really good ability to kind of build on things year over year and stay just a slight step ahead, even if it's not a super complicated. I just think they mix up coverages well. They're hard to get a beat on, but I think the personnel concerns are well-founded. You mentioned John Franklin Myers, like a guy like Quentin Jefferson, who was really good for them last year. He was really good for them. And we'll talk about another team that Quentin Jefferson is on now. He's somebody that's how you feel dominant over the course of an entire game. When you're only playing your defensive lineman 700 snaps a season, when you're giving some of those snaps to a guy like Jefferson, who got you 6 sacks last year on a per snap basis, was still really effective even deep into his career, we're chipping away at that stuff now. Now we got Javon Kinlaw starting for this team with real questions about how many real pass rushers they have behind them on the interior. You mentioned the lack of size without John Franklin Myers, but even the guys they're relying on now, like Will McDonald has to come in and make a difference for this team now if they're going to be as good on defense. Hassan Reddick has to come in and be as good as Bryce Huff was last year for them to be as good on defense. I think there's a world where that happens. Reddick played the 6th most snaps among edge players last year. Huff obviously was a rotational player. You're going to take something off of Reddick's plate. Can you get more of him on a per snap basis? Like there's a chance it all comes together, but I just think threading the needle is a little tougher. And again, there's like a health thing with me. Mosley, the combination of Mosley, Quincy Williams, Sauce, and DJ Reed missed a combined 3 games last year. What if that's 12? Like what happens to this team? Because they don't have real answers behind those guys. And I think especially at corner, you could say that about a lot of teams, but I think they were healthy in the right ways last season. If they're a little bit less healthy, what does that ultimately mean? So I had them at 2. I kind of feel bad about it now. I kind of wish I had them a little bit lower. Like you've talked me into this.
No, they're still a really good unit too. I don't want to sit here and poo-poo the 5th best defense here. I still think the secondary is really, really good. Like again, I would like them to hit people a little bit more, but just in terms of pure coverage skills, I mean, it's them in Cleveland. Like just in terms of pure man-to-man, like you can just run with guys. It's them in Cleveland, and that's it. And so I think that they definitely have that going for them if they can stay healthy. The front will still be good too, right? They're not going to be bad. It's just when you go from being an elite defense because your front was maybe the best in the league to now your front is maybe the 6th or 7th best in the league. Okay, well that kind of just changes the math and structure of what you are defensively. So yeah, they'll be good. They will still be very good. And again, the continuity was a huge part for me why I didn't want to drop them any lower. I think keeping basically every other defense I have in the top 5 was a continuity thing, except for one was just you have a lot of the same guys and a lot of the same coaches. Cool, that's really good. I think that's a good thing.
And that's part of it. That's what did it for me. Like the Ravens lose a defensive coordinator, the Patriots lose Bill Belichick, and so that's why I just kept pushing them up and up and up. And I think everything that you said is totally fair. Even like at safety, Chuck Clark gets hurt last year. You don't have to rely on him, but you had Adams and Whitehead that played for a majority of the season. Now Clark is starting for you. You're just chipping away at the depth in a lot of these different spots, and I think that is at least worth acknowledging. But again, they were so good last year, and bringing back the people in charge of that thing, I think that's why I gave them the benefit of the doubt a little bit. All right, at 5, I had the New England Patriots.
Okay, I had them a little bit higher. I think we flipped the Patriots and the Jets.
So did you have them at 2?
I think I had them at. Well, no, I had them at 3. Sorry.
Okay, all right. So you had the Patriots at 3. I have them at 5. Bill Belichick is the best defensive coach of all time. Like, I just don't, even if you feel so good about the personnel and the fact that they were last year, they were number one in the NFL in EPA per play on defense in the second half of the season while being the most injured team in the league on defense. That's crazy. Like, so you assume that with better health in the secondary, you get Christian Gonzalez back. Marcus Jones is banged up now, but hopefully he gets back. You feel good about the safeties. I'm sure you'll talk about the linebackers. Like, they're going to be so much healthier on that side of the ball. But how much does that matter, and how much does that offset losing arguably the greatest defensive coach that we've ever seen? And that Steve Belichick was a defensive play caller. He's not there anymore either. So you've got carryover. Christian Covington, their defensive coordinator, was on the staff last year. I like that more than starting over with a new scheme. But I think it's really important to acknowledge like what sort of defensive coach Bill Belichick is, even if the offense was an absolute mess over the last 3 years.
I think that's totally understandable. That's the reason I think I had them a little bit lower, especially, yeah, I don't know. Bill is the greatest of all time. And even if we think Mayo is going to be good, and maybe I'm just buying it too much, I do think he's going to be good. But even if
he
he's
might
good,
be.
He's not Bill. Like, there's just not another Bill.
And that's
and so
okay to say. It's okay
yes.
if Jerod Mayo is not Bill Belichick from a defensive tactician point of view in year one.
Yeah, it's okay if he's not the greatest to ever do it, especially in year one. There's absolutely no crime in that. But I still think, even though they lose a little bit of continuity, I mean, I know he was on the staff, but he wasn't calling plays. He's not Bill Belichick. I think in terms of personnel, they brought back basically everybody that was playing significant snaps last year. Losing Christian Barmore is an absolutely huge thing for them, and that's certainly
it's a
going to hurt.
huge deal. That's the other thing that pushed them down a little bit for me. I think he was their best player. He had 12 more pressures than anyone else on the team last year. And I get that Judon's coming back and Uche had a down year, Keon White in year 2, fine. But Christian Barmore is a linchpin of why this defense was good last year, and just taking him out of it, that's a monstrous thing for this team.
Yeah, I think more than anything, you lose a lot of your ability to get into the backfield with him. Like, I still think even without him, a lot of their other defensive linemen are good at holding space. They know how to get where they need to be, all that other jazz. But in terms of actually affecting the quarterback and hitting the running back in the backfield, he is the biggest reason that they were able to do that. And them losing him is why I flipped them from 2 to 3 at the very last minute. So I did have them at 2.
But you still have them at 3. So talk me into this.
Okay, so for me, it is a lot of kind of the opposite of what I talked about with the Jets. This is just a team that plays the way that I think defense needs to be played. They are just a very sound unit. They're a very versatile unit. They're a very physical unit. This is a plays, not players defense. And I think that that's okay. And obviously, when you lose Bill Belichick, maybe that gets not as sound. But I think when you have a guy like Mayo who has played in the system and then obviously coached in the system for a long time, he should understand how it is supposed to work. And then they're bringing back almost all of the same guys. So it's not like they're having to integrate guys into the system and, our new starting safety or whatever has to learn all this and that. That's not really going to be a problem. And then you look at, to me, some of the other young guys on the team that I think could really take a step forward. I thought Christian Gonzalez looked pretty good when he was allowed to play. It was only like a couple of games. Yeah, before he got hurt, he looked really, really good. And again, I've said it before, just the style of corner I like: big, physical, long, just the type of guy who, one, is just a really good corner, but just really fits for the personality of this defense. And then Keon White, I know he didn't really put up numbers last year, but this defense always has a 280-pound defensive end who crushes the pocket. Like, Trey Flowers was probably the most notable recent one, but like they just kind of always have this guy. And I think Keon White, despite the numbers not being there, actually showed some pretty good stuff on film to that end. And I think if he takes a step forward this year, that could be absolutely huge for them in that regard. So I still just like a lot of the pieces here. And then, I talked about earlier, every defense has to have a henchman on the last show. Jelani Tavai, dude, he is actually a good player now.
100% the henchman on this team.
He is a legitimately good player. Now, he's good in the sense of you have to limit the things that he can do, but you can put him on the edge and he can set the edge. You can, if you're going to be in base personnel on first and second down, he can obviously defend the run from between the tackles. He's a shockingly good coverage defender, not eyes in the back of his head, run up the seam like Fred Warner, but he actually does really, really well to understand where he's supposed to be when he's flowing off the line of scrimmage, flowing out of the box initially. He's just I think a guy who has been very well coached in this defense and took to it very, very well. And that matters a lot. And I think that just matters a lot for kind of gluing things together over the middle. So I don't know,
That's
man.
exactly the right way to frame him, by the way. He's the glue guy. Like, he's just
Yeah,
doing a
he
little
is.
bit of everything. He's got a diverse role. We'll see if Mapu can be a similar sort of player this year as they like use him as that third safety. He's been a little banged up, but they just have a lot of those guys, and that's the nature of the defense, right? We have guys that can
Exactly.
play a variety of roles. Duggar can do that. I think all that stuff is totally reasonable. Again, for me, it's a Belichick thing and a Barmore thing. You lose the best defensive coach ever and the best player on your defense, arguably, it's going to have an impact. And I don't think it's going to have a monstrous impact. I still have them in the top 5, but that ultimately was the reason that I couldn't push them up even a little bit higher. I think they have a chance to be really good on that side of the ball, though. Who'd you have at 4?
At 4, I had the Kansas City Chiefs.
As did I.
And this is just, I know they lost L'Jarius Sneed, and L'Jarius Sneed is a really, really good player, truly an all-pro caliber player. It's Spags, dude. Like, I looked at the roster and I was like, man, this feels 5% worse, but they have Spags. They still have Chris Jones. They still have George Karlaftis. They still have their safeties. Like, Justin Reed played really, really well last year. They still have Trent McDuffie. I just thought they have most of their best players, and they have, with Belichick gone, maybe the best defensive play caller in the league. I was willing to give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt here. This is just, yeah, I'm willing to bet that Spags will have his unit right by December.
This is exactly where I land. I have nothing to add to that. Like, he is cooking right now. I mean, he's gotten to a place where, the amount of just very too high coverages that they play combined with the pressure, like, he's figured it out. Like, it has all just clicked into place when it's like, all right, this is the way I want to play with this personnel. And I know that losing Sneed disallows you from doing some of that, but not really. Like, Josh Williams is long. He can be physical. I think that he's probably going to end up winning that other outside corner job, which allows you to slide McDuffie inside. There's so much versatility. That's what I really like, is that in any given situation, we have 3 linebackers we feel good about, so we can play different fronts with those guys. Those guys have different skill sets, and the same is true on the back end. If you want to play in a world where Chamari Connor is your nickel because you need to be a little bit bigger there, you can play with McDuffie outside. If you want to slide McDuffie inside and put Josh Williams there and you play with the 2 safety, you can do that if you want to. There's just so much flexibility combined with the quality of the play caller and like real star power. Trent McDuffie is an all-pro level player. Chris Jones is an all-pro level player. You're dropping your first-round pick pass rusher now into this equation who didn't play last year with FAU. So I think that there's a chance that the talent, even after losing Sneed, is arguably better in 2024 than it was last year. And you combine that with Spags, and I think that they have the makings of a top 5 unit. Like, on a little technicality thing, I think that they might play such a pace and be so dominant on offense that just the style of games that they're in doesn't allow them to be a great defense. But that's really like my only sticking point with this. Everything else I feel pretty good about.
I totally understand that, and again, that's not even really their fault. That's just when Patrick
Yeah.
is scoring when Patrick is scoring 40, the other team is going to try to do the same thing. So that totally makes sense. For me too, it came down to, I think last year what we really saw and what made this Chiefs defense special was a lot of these guys that are starting for this team. These are Spags' guys. Like, these are guys that were drafted in the last 3-4 years that have been there since he's been there. They understand all the ins and outs of the system, and you've seen them be able to expand their toolbox a little bit because of that. And so obviously you lose L'Jarius Sneed, who is a true number 1 outside corner, but almost every other player who is starting on this defense is either Chris Jones, who I was drafted before he got there, but is an all-pro player, so who cares? And almost every other guy was drafted within the last 3-4 years and is a Spags guy who fully understands the ins and outs of the system. That is huge when you run some of the crazy shit that Spags wants to run.
That's what I mean. The vision has coalesced. Like, the vision has come into full view. They understand what it is now. And listen, L'Jarius Sneed's a great player, but guess what? They lost a number 1 corner 2 years ago in free agency. He left. They just slotted another one in there. And I'm not saying that Josh Williams is going to be Travarius Ward or L'Jarius Sneed, but if there's any coaching staff that deserves the benefit of the doubt for how they've developed these outside corners over the last 3 or 4 years, it's Steve Spagnuolo and Dave Merritt, their defensive backs coach. Like, this group has shown an ability to do it consistently, and I think that there's a chance they do it again. The one guy I did not mention by name that I want to, because I think he's actually awesome, is Mike Dana. I think Mike
Yes.
Dana is like a really good football player. He got a contract extension this offseason. He's like their second, third defensive end. When Amenahu comes back, he's probably your fourth, defensive end or third. He's undersized, but I love that guy. He just gives you a ton. I think that he can hold up against the run better than you might think at his size. He's got some juice as a pass rusher. Like the fact that that's the third or fourth edge player when everybody else is healthy, I think speaks to some of the depth and the quality of this defense. Like you mentioned, 3-4 years into them really building it up.
I 100% agree with that. Dana is such a good player, and he's just the type of player that encapsulates what a good physical defense is supposed to be. Where, like you said,
Correct.
when he's your third, fourth defensive end off the board, he's a little bit undersized, but you still see him setting the edge. You're like, wait, they could just get this off the edge from a 250-pound guy. It's
They
crazy what
find
they've been able to do.
physicality in so many different ways. Like the fact that Chanel gives it to them. Like Tranquil just has like a real fuck you attitude about him at this stage of his career. Like the play he had, I think it was on the first play of the AFC Championship game, where I think it was Zeitler or John Simpson. I couldn't remember which guard. He essentially just like put his forearm in his chin. And it was just like, this is how that's going to go today. Just want to let you know. That
He never
matters.
did that with the Chargers, by the way. Never.
But
Like,
it's
that's just not
exactly
who
what
he
I'm
was.
talking about with the Packers and the Browns last year. Like when you can take the same pieces and you can drop them into a different defense that plays a different way and you can get different results. And I think you can do it on a unit-wide level and you can do it on an individual player level. And I think that that's why he was available for $2 million or whatever it was last offseason. And then he got a nice little chunk of change this year because he looked like a different player in this defense. And that speaks to coaching. And I think that they've really consistently shown an ability to do that. All right. So you had the Chiefs at 4. Who'd you have at 3?
That was the Patriots, who we already
Okay.
kind of talked about, but yeah.
All right. So I had, and I guess you have this team at 2. I had the Baltimore Ravens at 3. I already feel bad about that. I wish I had the Jets lower. I don't know why. Again, it was the continuity thing. With the Ravens. So you had them at 2. Let me I'll lay out some of the negatives and some of the concerns I have before you can tell me that I'm overcorrecting too much. Losing Clowney is a big deal. Okay. It's a big deal. He had 10 sacks last year. He had 71 pressures last year. He had the best pass rushing season of his career. Chuck Smith, their outside linebackers coach, is kind of this renowned technician, some of the cross chop stuff. Clowney's tool bag was never that deep. He's a power guy. He's explosive. That's why he's a good run defender. But some of the things he added to his bag last year as a pass rusher, we got a different version of him. Losing him matters. I do think that Owe took a bigger step forward than maybe some people might credit him with last year. I think that he's only 25. I think he has a chance to take even another step. But now you're relying on Kyle Van Noy as your second edge guy rather than your third edge guy. Like, again, we're chipping away at some of the depth here. And I think that matters. The other spots, like, I don't know, Eddie Jackson for Geno Stone, I feel fine about that. Trenton Simpson for Patrick Queen, I feel okay about that. But at the core of this, like, Mike McDonald was really good at his job. He was really, really, really good at his job. You said Spags might be the best defensive play caller in a post-Belichick world. Mike McDonald certainly has a claim to the crown based on what he did with that unit over the last couple years. And even if you're bullish on Zach Orr, who's now stepping in for him, you lose McDonald, who's a proven difference-making coordinator, and you lose a couple other guys on the staff. Bernard Wilson, their DB's coach in Tennessee now. Anthony Weaver was their defensive line coach. Now he's the defensive coordinator in Miami. So enough change and enough questions from me on the edge where I push them a tiny bit down, even if I think that this still has a chance to be a really, really good defense. So tell me why I'm taking all those things too far.
No, you know what? All of that stuff is fair, and I think Clowney is especially a good point because, kind of like what I talked about with John Franklin Myers with the Jets, it's just he was kind of their beef and their strength off the edge, and obviously, like you said, he added a little bit more to his bag than that, but he was kind of their tone setter off the edge, and if you don't have that, that certainly hurts a little bit, and they didn't really add a whole lot to fix that. Maybe their young players take a step, but even
You're
stylistically, even if those
big
guys
bet
take a
on
step,
Ajabo, man. A
it's
guy we haven't
it's
seen play yet.
but even if he's good, he's just like the polar opposite player of Clowney anyway, so it doesn't even really fix the problem. Like Ojabo is more like Josh Uche or Bryce Huff. Like he's that style of player, so it doesn't even stylistically do a whole lot to replace Clowney. For me, it just came down to a lot of I think I am buying Zach Orr, or rather, I'm buying the Ravens as an organization.
As you
because,
should.
I kind of, right, as I should, because, we did this with McDonald in a way 2-3 years ago where he had been on the Ravens staff for a very long time, learning under Wink Martindale for a lot of that time. Went and spent a year in Michigan, was obviously really good, and then came back to Baltimore, or has been on this staff for a while. And this is one of the handful of organizations where if you have a guy who has just been born and bred there to coach, I'm probably going to trust him. And so again, we haven't really seen him call plays yet, but this is one of the handful of orgs where it's like, yeah, man, I will give you the benefit of the doubt that this guy will have his stuff together. And then I think even with losing Clowney, I'm still pretty bullish on the rest of the roster. I think their interior defensive line is really good, and they have a lot of depth there. Like they have 3, 4, 5 dudes who can go play ball, and I think having that is absolutely huge. Roquan Smith is anybody who's listened to me ever knows that I'm the biggest Roquan Smith fan in the world. He just unlocks so much in coverage. He unlocks so much in terms of what you can do defending the perimeter, whether it's screens, run game, all that sort of stuff. Kyle Hamilton is truly one of one in the way that he plays the position, just in terms of body type, physicality, coverage skills. And I think when you have not just a player who is an all pro like him,
let's take
but
a step back. If you're putting together a defense right now,
mm-hmm.
how quickly does Kyle Hamilton go off the board for you?
Like,
is he one of the first 10 defensive players you pick?
I think he has to be. I think he absolutely has to be. I think there's going to be a handful of edge players you got to take, maybe 1 or 2 defensive tackles, maybe 1
I
or 2
think
corners
the
like
defensive
Sauce and
tackle
Surtain,
group is deeper than you want it to be if you're trying to make
true.
the Hamilton case. Like there's so many guys now, even without Donald, Jones, Quinnen Williams. I think Dexter Lawrence is probably in that conversation. Like there are a lot of guys affecting the game. Jeffrey Simmons, I'd probably take Hamilton over Jeffrey Simmons, but like there's a lot of those guys right now. And then you have all the edge guys. It's probably a discussion, but the fact that we're talking about like a hybrid nickel safety, even in the same breath as those guys at those positions, I think speaks to how much of a unicorn we're talking about here.
That's what sets it over the edge. It's not just that he is an all-pro caliber safety nickel, whatever you want to put it. It's just that the way he plays, there literally isn't an like there's no other analogous player for him. He is truly a one of one in terms of body type, physicality, and coverage skills. And I think that as a defense, again, when you have an organization that is so just well honed to what they want to do and what they want to be, when you have a player of this caliber, I think they're always going to get the best out of him. And then, I know it seems people are a little bit waffling on the corner room. I kind of think the corner room is fine, especially if Wiggins comes
I
on,
have
and I
no
think that they
issues with
really
it.
like him. Yeah, like I think Stevens is better than people think that he is. I think
Wiggins, I 100%
if
agree with that.
Yeah, I think if Wiggins adds 5 pounds and is built like an NFL player, he'll be totally fine. And then obviously Marlon Humphrey. Marlon Humphrey is a funny player. His bad moment, he's almost like Josh Allen as a quarterback in the sense of his bad moments are just so bad. He gets just fried on a go ball 3 or 4 times a year, and he just looks like the worst cornerback in the league. But on 95% of the other downs, he's a top 10 corner. And I still think that he's going to give them that this year. So I'm, like I said, losing Clowney off the edge hurts, and you want a little bit more there. But I think this is a defensive structure that can kind of make up for that. And then I just trust all the other players.
Yeah, you got difference makers at every level, right? Like Matabike came on last year in a huge way. He's such a good player. You got Roquan on the second level, and then you got Kyle Hamilton. And Marcus Williams was hurt for a huge chunk of last season. So now you get Marcus Williams hopefully back healthy. I think that has a chance to take this thing up a notch. And I feel really good about the corners. You had to play Millette last year because if you wanted to keep Hamilton at safety, you really didn't have a better option there. I thought Millette had easily the best season of his career, which you could say that about a dozen Ravens last year. Now I just think you have more options. Demarion Williams is a 4th round pick. I just think you have a ton more options. And I think the Eddie Jackson thing is important because even if you're a little bit worried about Eddie Jackson, the whole point of having Eddie Jackson is so you can move Kyle Hamilton to the nickel when you want to. So getting that third safety in the building is a huge deal. And I'm with you on Orr. I obviously losing McDonald's a big deal. I talked to Kyle Hamilton about this, and I thought his answer was interesting. I'm always curious about how the personality of the defensive coordinator is manifested in how they call the game. And obviously we haven't seen him do that yet. But he told me that Mike could be a little prescriptive, not in a bad way, where it's like, based on down distance and personnel, this is a call I feel really good about. And because Orr played, I think there's more of a let's freestyle a little bit here, where it's like on 3rd and 12, rather than just calling like some sort of like safe version of cover 3 and rallying and tackling, like, can we create an explosive play? And there's risk in that, but I do think that there's a chance that you can make like a really dynamic unit. The transition from year 1 to year 2 with McDonald was him going from, I'm afraid something bad is going to happen, to how can I make something good happen? And I think that there's a chance they even accelerate that or turn that up even more with a guy who has Orr's personality. And you combine that with some of the tweaks that I think that they're going to bring to this defense coverage wise. And I still think that they're going to be really, really good.
If Orr could find the aggressiveness meter between where McDonald was and where Wink was before him, we're in a great spot here.
And I honestly think that's probably what he's shooting for. So I think that might be it. You had the Patriots at 2, right?
At 3. The Ravens were 2.
Ravens at 2. So we both had the same team at number 1, which was the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah.
I'll start this. When I was starting this list, I did not anticipate having the Cleveland Browns at number 1. Volatility on defense is super real. And especially when you have a historic year like they did. They were historically dominant for huge stretches. And some things that happened in the second half of the season gave me a little bit of pause. And it wasn't the Texans game in the playoffs. It was the Rams game. What the Rams did to them and what a good defense can do or a good offense with a good quarterback and a really good play caller and a good plan can do to a team like this that is in regulated coverage looks. You know how to kind of pull levers. If they're going to be in man, we can make the nickel run 100 wind sprints over the course of the game. I was a little worried about that. Like, when they play good defenses, good quarterbacks, are they going to have some of these issues because the defense is a little bit simpler than some of the other really good teams, the Ravens of the world? But then you start actually looking at it, and you look at players other teams lost, play callers other teams lost, and also they don't play any good offenses. They play the Bengals twice, and they play the Ravens twice. Other than that, they have like a week 14 game against the Chiefs. For the most part, they're playing mediocre to bad offenses and quarterbacks. And this is the type of defense that feasts on mediocre to bad offenses and quarterbacks. So I just think that there's a chance we see it again. And when they have to play against elite teams in the back half of the season and into the playoffs, I still have some concerns about some of the changeups, so we can talk about that. But that wasn't enough for me to knock them from this perch. They can take a huge step back and regress and still be the best defense in the league, considering where they were at last year.
I'm so with all of that. And the thing is, I don't know if I would. I think it's hard to project exactly where each defense is going to rank, but this was the defense where I most felt like they will be top 5 one way or another, because it's what you said. Who was the worst player that they lost? Anthony Walker? I mean, he's an
and
okay linebacker,
I think they believe that they upgraded with Jordan Hicks stepping into that spot.
In terms of hitting people and playing in the box, they're absolutely right. And I think you need that when your other linebacker is JOK, who is incredibly fast, incredibly quick, does not take on blocks very well. So I think they've actually kind of made their pairing there make more sense, which last year stylistically they kind of did too. But with the defensive tackle group, like, this was a unit where 2-3 years ago, man, you could run on them probably more than any other interior in the league. Especially, it was bad, dude. Every double team was guaranteed 6 yards off the ball. That's just not the case anymore. And then you mentioned at the top of the show, Quentin Jefferson. Where's he at now? Cleveland.
Yeah.
It's a perfect spot for him. Like, they understand, I think, what the weakest points of the defense were 2 years ago, and all they've done this offseason is like continue to build on what that was. And then they still have all their star players in the secondary. Obviously, you have the best defensive player in the league now because Aaron Donald's gone. Now you have Myles Garrett. It's just, I don't know, man. There's too many of the great things there from last year that are still there. Like, almost nothing has changed.
Yeah, they go 5 deep at defensive tackle. Their 3rd round pick, Taki, I think is his name. They actually feel pretty good about him from a couple of years ago, just as like another body they can throw at the problem. The fact that Quentin Jefferson is the 5th defensive tackle on this team is wild. Even if you want to hem and haw about whether it's him or Mo Hurst. Mo Hurst was really good for this team last year. And then they go 2 deep along the defensive line, and at some positions 3 deep. It's absolutely ridiculous. The linebackers are solid. Tomlinson and Greg Newsome are both hurt right now. They're both coming off surgeries. Based on conversations yesterday, they're likely to be ready for week 1. So they should be fully healthy by the time this thing all gets kicked off. And one of the things I was curious about when I was there yesterday is just asking, all right, what sort of wrinkles? Not what are they going to be? You don't have to tell me that, but are you aware of the fact that you need some more of them? because by the end of last year's team's got to beat on you. And the answer to that is yes. Like, I think we're going to see more disguise from this team this year. Last year, it was, we're going to line up in single high, and we're just going to beat the shit out of you. Like, we know that we can do it. We're better than you. And
their only changeup was Schwartz would call like a cover two.
A funky cover two look.
Yeah, he would just be a weird cover two once every drive, and it would be like, all right, that's it. I did it. I don't have to think about it anymore.
So I think that we're going to see some more ambiguity on the back end, because last year it was about establishing, this is our identity. This is who we want to be. This is the way we want to play. Now you step into year 2. What do the tweaks on that look like? Can you be a little bit harder for these good offenses, good play callers to get a beat on? And I think the answer might be yes. And you combine that with just the personnel with really no weaknesses, like really no weaknesses. And even on the back end, like, Rodney McLeod gives his team decent snaps. Last year, Ronnie Hickman, who had to play for them last year when Delpit got hurt, I think that was actually a good thing for them because they've developed some depth in some of those spots. That there are just very, very few personnel weaknesses. And if they can change things up enough on the back end and just throw 3, 4, 5 more curveballs a game at some of these really good teams, I still feel good about betting on them to be the best defense in the league.
Dude, Delpit, by the way, you talked about, Schwartz obviously coming in and changing the attitude of this defense. I don't think you saw that from anybody more than Grant Delpit.
That's 100% correct.
When Delpit came out of college, the thing was like, he can't tackle. He takes bad angles. He doesn't want to hit people in the run game. Dude, you watch him last year, he is in the box mashing tight ends. You're like, I was literally stunned when I saw Grant Delpit. I was like, is that, like, do I have the jersey number wrong? Like, is that actually the same player that I thought he was at LSU? It's a startling transformation for him. It's awesome.
I think he was way in his own head in the previous system. There's just too many things rattling around in there. And I think simplifying things for him specifically went a long way. And that's why you saw a different version of him. There are even things about this team last year that, like, they were unlucky. They were dead last in red zone touchdown rate allowed. They allowed 71% of opponent drives last year ended in touchdowns against the Browns. They were dead last at EPA per play in the red zone. Like, there's a chance that they could be better in some of these areas. They won't be better as a defense. Like, they will not be. And I think they're even prepared for a situation where they're like the 5th best defense in the league, because that's just typically how it goes. But again, I just couldn't find a team that I was willing to make the bet on in a way that I'm willing to make it on them.
Exactly. The other teams had too many questions, too many new questions. The Browns defense doesn't have any new questions. They are what they were last year. I'm willing to bet on that.
The last stat I'll throw out, when they blitzed last year, they gave up 3.5 yards per play. That was a full yard better than any other defense in the league. The gap between them and the Jets at 2 was bigger than the gap between the Jets and the team at 15. Like, there's some wild stats with this team. So again, even if they get worse, even if they play like a more normal NFL defense for 17 games, they still could potentially be the best defense in the league. So, all right. That is all we've got. Those are our top 10 lists. List off yours one more time for me, 10-1, before we get out of here.
All right, let's do this one more time. The Detroit Lions at 10, and then the San Francisco 49ers, the Houston Texans, the Chicago Bears, the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Jets, the Kansas City Chiefs, the New England Patriots, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Cleveland Browns.
I had the Cowboys at 10, the Niners at 9, the Texans at 8, the Packers at 7, the Steelers at 6, the Patriots at 5, the Chiefs at 4, the Ravens at 3, the Jets at 2, the Browns at 1. I kind of want to move the Ravens up and just say they're at 2, but I'm going to stick with my list. I'm not going to not going to run away from my choices here. And the only teams you had, the Lions and the Bears in your top 10. I did not. I would have had the Bears at 11. And I absolutely think that I would have had the Lions at like 13, 14. And so them being a top 10 defense wouldn't surprise me at all. I think the reasons for optimism you trotted out are totally fair. All right.
And with the Packers, I want to say really quickly, if they are that good, this team is winning 14 games. Like, actually.
Yeah. And that's partially why I almost didn't want to do it. If Texans too, like if the Texans are going to have the 4th best offense and the 8th best defense, like, man, and part of me thinks we might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but with what happened with the Browns last year, I kept coming back to who has a chance to be this year's Browns. And so that's why that was the answer that I eventually went with. All right. That is all we've got today. We will be back tomorrow with my buddy Greg Rosenthal. We're going to be talking about some training camp storylines. What are we buying? What are we not? What matters? What doesn't matter? Always excited to chat with Greg. And I think that, he has such a good feel for all this stuff and being able to kind of wade through the bullshit at this point in the calendar. So excited to have that discussion with him. that is all we have for today. For Derek, for our producer Michael Bauer, I'm Robert Mays. We'll talk to you guys later.